Alright, guys, so Christmas is coming and this should be a time to be jolly and make merry, but not for the EU. And who needs enemies when you have friends like this? And it looks like Europe is about to enter yet another nightmare. For over 2 years, the EU economy has been clobbered. We have seen widespread de-industrialization across the Union, and Germany is the poster child of that. German companies, big multinationals, they're moving away from Germany to the US and even China. Volkswagen is on the brink of shutting down plants or imposing big pay cuts. And if we look at the flow of money, the biggest EU economy is on a path of industrial destruction. Since 2014, capital has been flowing out of Germany. But since the war, we are seeing an escalation of private investment leaving the country. On average, 80 billion euros a year is leaving the economy. And Donald Trump is about to deal the final blow to Europe's economy. The EU might be part of NATO, they might be a US ally even. But Trump's trade war doesn't discriminate.
Or any other country. I don't want to pick on China because the European Union is almost as bad as China. They don't accept your cars. They don't accept your farm products, but they send their farm products here and they send their cars here by the millions and millions. So if China or any other country charges 100 or 200% tax, then we will charge them 100 or 200% tax in return. It's called an eye for an eye, and it'll all stop.
So imagine you're Brussels, you obeyed the Biden administration and did everything that Biden wanted, from seizing Russian assets all the way to oil sanctions. You basically followed the playbook. And instead of getting a reward, a new president now wants to slap tariffs on you. In fact, he's upping the stakes. Trump is demanding the EU to buy more US oil and gas or face tariffs. And when Trump says gas, we all know what he means: expensive LNG ship across the Atlantic. And he has made it abundantly clear in his message and in no uncertain terms: Europe will have to pay. I told the EU they must make up their tremendous deficit with the United States. Otherwise, it is tariffs all the way. Trump knows this. Getting Europe to buy expensive US energy is a big win for his economy. And considering their options, it's very likely they will cave. As the US, you want to bring back industries and factories back home. There are only a few choices left because your cost of production is already very high. China isn't playing ball, they're keeping their own technology in-house, so punishing Beijing won't yield much results. China has Asia, Latin America, and BRICS as alternative markets. China also gets a ton of energy from Russia, so there's very little leverage Washington has over the Chinese. But Europe is trapped. They're pissed off China with their EV tariffs, and Europe, well, they also cut themselves away from cheap Russian energy, and it's politically impossible to backtrack on either. It will be humiliating. And here's the leverage Trump has. The US is the largest trading partner for the EU. US consumers accounts for nearly 20% of total EU exports. By imposing tariffs, even if it's 10% or even 25%, Trump could grind EU industries into the dust. The cost of production is already incredibly high. Slapping taxes on top of that is going to be unthinkable. Now, when Trump threatens tariffs, he's basically weaponizing the biggest consumer market in the world. And if the EU loses access, their industries will collapse even faster. But let's also talk about the euro. Since 2021, Europe's currency has fallen by over 6% against the dollar. Why? Because demand for EU products have gone down, and by extension, global demand for euros to settle trade has also collapsed. And if Trump checkmates the EU with big tariffs, the demand for European products will fall even more. And this could spark another devaluation of the euro, which in turn forces their imports to become more expensive. So now you're staring at a new currency crisis. Suddenly, the cost of living in Europe becomes even more unbearable. As it stands, the US supplies 15% of EU's oil imports in Q3 this year. And for LNG, US supply accounts for the majority of their imports as well, more than Qatar and Russian LNG combined. What Trump wants is for Europe to cut away their other suppliers and rely solely on US LNG. And that is the price to access the US consumer market tariff-free. And it was von der Leyen who planted this idea into Trump's head. And in soccer, we call this an own goal. It's bizarre and sad at the same time.
It's the whole topic of LNG. We still get a lot of LNG via Russia, from Russia. And why not replace it by American LNG, which is cheaper for us and brings down our energy prices, but is something where we can get into a discussion, also what our trade deficit is concerned. So engage, look at common interest, and then negotiate.
But let's look at the facts here. Can Europe afford to buy expensive US oil and gas, especially LNG? Won't it be counterproductive and smash their industrial capacity? Even in September this year, Europe's gas prices were 2 to 3 times higher than the levels between 2019 and 2021. German power, for example, cost around 67 euros per megawatt hour in 2024. However, just 5 years back, it was only 38 euros, and that's nearly 40 to 50% cheaper. Which brings us to a dilemma. If Europe buys more US LNG to replace Russian supply, which is cheaper, the additional cost of manufacturing might exceed US tariffs. So if Trump removes a 10 or 25% tariff, but the cost of production goes up by 25% or more, what's the point of buying US LNG? You are back at square one. In fact, it's worse than square one because now your products are unsellable to the rest of the world. China, for one, would eat your lunch. They export deflation, and everyone today, we can all agree, could use more affordable goods. But let's look from America's perspective. If Europe is forced to buy more US oil and gas, hey, it's Boomtown Charlie again. The US today is the biggest LNG exporter in the world. In 2023, US exports exceeded every other country at over 14 billion cubic feet a day, more than Russia, Qatar, and even Australia. The US energy complex is also a big winner from this conflict, not just China. But let's realize this is coming at the expense of someone else. LNG is the most expensive type of natural gas. You have to liquefy it and put it on a specialized ship. You then have to regasify it again at the final destination. This isn't free. The process costs a ton of money, and in the ship itself, there's boil off. And that's where the LNG suddenly evaporates away into the ether. You can lose up to 0.25% of the total volume a day during the voyage, and all that adds cost to the price of energy. It's like booking a limousine to deliver your stuff from Amazon, and that's why LNG is a last resort when you have very few alternatives. The EIA shows us who are the biggest customers of US LNG, and guess what? Surprise, surprise, it's Europe. Compared to 2021, exports increased by over 100%. And in 2023, this went up again by another 7%. Europe is buying nearly 8 billion cubic feet a day, and Trump wants them to buy even more. And this is where we have to give a standing ovation because Trump has got Europe truly cornered. If you want access to the US market, you gotta buy our expensive gas supply. And if you listen to mainstream media, they focus a lot on US LNG capacity, that the US is maxed out and there's nothing left to sell to Europe. However, according to the EIA, the US is about to expand its export capacity in 2025 and beyond. And this is going to be a big increase that will even shock OPEC countries. North America's LNG export capacity is on track to double by 2028. You see that increase in blue? That's the additional export capacity the US wants to add. It's at least an additional 10 billion cubic feet per day. And just like any other project, you want to secure your demand before you build out your supply, which is what Trump is doing. Just look at where the new facilities will be located. The majority will be in the Gulf of Mexico. Golden Pass and Port Arthur are the new LNG terminals under construction. And Europe, as a customer, allows US LNG to just swing across the Atlantic to get paid. So we have established that the US would be the big winner here. EU money will be helping to build out the American energy complex. Big oil is about to get even bigger with Europe as a customer. It's also critical to realize this dependency on the US goes beyond just the consumer market. Having the power to print dollars and a big consumer economy is definitely a big leverage, but just think about it. What kind of leverage can be even more urgent? Well, it's security and the threat of the US leaving NATO. And the United States is reminding Europe to pay up now. In a not so pleasant message, Trump is demanding NATO members spend at least 5% of GDP on defense. This message is, of course, directed to the EU. So it's a double whammy, and 2025 is going to be hell for Europe. Once again, Trump is applying the financial squeeze on Europe. And I'm very sure he knows the EU can't really afford it. Well, technically they can pay for it, but the expense would be insane. The current NATO's target is 2% of GDP on defense, and the majority of EU countries are just scraping it. 3% would be the new target, but Trump, he wants to jack it all the way to 5%. And if Europe doesn't play ball, it's open season for the US. Trump could tariff NATO based on defense spending, or he could do the worst. He could pull away military support to Europe. He could even abandon Article 5, which would be unthinkable to them. Now, we know Trump wants to end the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. He has said it many times. So funding is going to drain away in 2025. Can Europe afford to fight the Russians without US aid? And how much money can they divert to defense before the real economy collapses? Is building more tanks or saving the auto industry more important? And these are serious questions for the EU because Trump, well, he's going to force them to choose. So, ladies and gentlemen, 2025 is going to be wild. The US has given Europe a Christmas surprise they never wanted. Trump's all about MAGA and he's going to do it at Europe's expense. And as it stands, he's probably going to get his demands met. The EU, well, they are out of options. But let me know what you think. Will the EU dump everything for US LNG? And can Europe afford Trump's 5% target for defense spending? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.